Okay, I'm a little nervous, so be patient with me, okay? All right, my talk is, and I'm going to have a book published, by the way, and the title is From Nundom to Freedom. And my friend Murad, who's sitting up here in a blue shirt, she's the one that suggested that, so I am eternally grateful to her for that. Okay, a little bit of background. I was born in New Jersey, a little town called North Bergen, and I'm the oldest of six. I had a dad who was a CPA and a mom who was a stay-at-home, do-everything multitasker. I have 4 brothers and a sister, and my early life was happy. It was very uneventful, but it was happy. We were raised Catholic, and that meant Mass on Sunday and mac and cheese on Friday and confession every other Saturday. I mean, that was basically it. Nothing was forced down our throats, but one wouldn't dream of not going to Mass or eating meat on Friday. I mean, one did not dream of that. Everybody, every aunt, uncle, every grandparent, every cousin, we all did it. As I said, we were happy. When I was 11, we moved to a new town, and the kids there were a lot more sophisticated than I was. The girls were all worried about what boy liked whom. And the boys thought it was funny, of course, and they would purposely entice us and then dump us. And I just couldn't live with that. I said to myself, I'm not going to be brokenhearted like these other girls. Everybody's crying all the time. So I just decided I am not going to have anything to do with it. And it was then that I first thought, well, maybe I could be a nun. And that way I'd have Jesus, and he's not going to dump me. So let's do that. And Sister gave us a comic book called The Brides of Christ. And I read that comic book, and it was so romantic. I don't know how they got it romantic, but they got that comic book romantic. And I fell head over heels in love with Jesus, and I was going to be his bride forever and ever and ever. I didn't tell anybody, though. I mean, to me, it was something that you don't talk about. So got to high school, and it was a religious high school, all girls, and it was run by the Felician Sisters in Lodi, New Jersey. And I just loved my science teacher, and I loved science as it was anyway, so she was my ideal, my idol, I just loved her to death. Anyway, I decided if I'm going to be a nun, I'm going to be like Sister Amadeus. So I told them that I would like to join them, and they had in the high school, some of the students there were already pledged to be nuns, and they were called Juvenists. And so I decided I want to be a Juvenist. So I went home and told Mom and Dad I want to be a Juvenist because I'm going to be a nun. Mom and Dad, they're happy that I was going to be a nun. That was perfectly acceptable back in the 50s. That really was a very acceptable thing. My maternal aunt was a nun. She was overjoyed. Everybody's overjoyed. But they didn't want me to go to high school there. Finish high school, finish college, then go be a nun. Well, Father Mulquinn told my parents that they're going to go to hell if they try stopping me. So rather than go to hell, they said, okay. So in August... So in August, off I go to the juniorate, which is the first stage of Nundom. First the juniorate while you're in high school. Then you become a postulant, and you wear a little habit and a little veil, but you can see your hair, which was quite risque. Then the next year, you got a new name so that you would die to the world. Elizabeth Oleski, that was my name. Elizabeth Oleski would be no more. You're now Sister Mary Concordia. Like the battleship, the big gray battleship. So I was Sister Mary Concordia, and then you take vows for a year at a time for the next 6 years, and finally you make your perpetual vows forever. Well, going back to the high school part now, while I was in high school, as I said, I loved my science teacher. I had always loved science, and I wrote a lovely paper on evolution. Oh, mistake to write a. And I quoted Teilhard de Chardin, the French priest. I thought, sure, everybody's eyes are going to be open. They're going to see that Genesis is not false, of course, but it's a way that God had to speak to these poor primitive Bronze Age people. He couldn't explain to them about the universe and all that. Changes. So they had to have a little story, and that was the little story. As I said, that was never well received, and when it came time for me to read that paper, I was told I could not read it, and I had to write a paper on the water system of Lodi. Boring. Really, really, really boring. Okay, and it was a culture shock here. Here I am, we're one of 30 to 40 girls, ages 14 to 18, not doing any of the things that teenage girls do. No makeup, no pocketbook, no, everybody dressed exactly the same. There was uniformity. And you started learning about obedience, and that was the big thing, obedience. If you disobeyed Mother Superior, you were disobeying God. And if you disobey God, you know what happens to you when you die. So I made sure I was very, very, very obedient. There was also no affection. And in my family, kissed everybody good morning, kissed everybody hello, kissed everybody goodbye, kissed everybody, hugged everybody, all the time. We were a very huggy family. And all of a sudden there's what they called untouchability. You weren't allowed to touch anybody. You weren't allowed to hug anybody. You weren't supposed to have a best friend. At the time, that's what I thought they meant when they used the phrase particular friendship. I'll get to that later. But anyway, I just thought it meant you can't have a best friend. So we got through those 3 years, and they were good times because we had a choral group and a choir, and that was fun. And we wrote lovely songs, and one of the girls in my group was a really songwriter and musician, and I even wrote one of the songs. I still have the record of the whole thing, and it was fun. I mean, we did have some fun, and singing the beautiful masses. I mean, the music was gorgeous. We one time sang at Carnegie Hall as a group. So we were good, and we enjoyed it. Okay, in August of '57, after graduating, I went to the convent proper. I was now a postulant. Little black habit, little black veil, and I was called Sister Elizabeth, but I was now Sister, and I was so proud of myself. And they started explaining the purpose of novitiate, and they were very honest. The purpose of the novitiate, which is postulancy and novicehood and first time you profess, was to break you down into little bits, to break your spirit, to destroy who you were, so that you could be remade into a sweet, holy, obedient nun. The obedient was always real important to them. So I was practicing becoming a sweet, dear, obedient nun. I did not succeed too well, but I did try. I really, really tried. There's a theory, maybe I shouldn't call it a theory, but one of the teachings, especially of the early church, was that the more you suffer, the better off you're going to be in heaven. We live in a vale of tears, and if we're really good and suffer very hard, we're going to go to heaven and have a high place. And that's why you hear stories of some of these crazy early Christians. Simon Stylites, he set up on a pole, so that he got food delivered to him in a basket, and God knows what he sent down, but it was, the more you suffer, the better. People wore haircloth garments. I'm not sure what they mean by a haircloth. I think it's the animal skin worn inside out with the hair rubbing your body, and it was very, very itchy and miserable. So one time I got an old habit, and I scratched it and tore it so it would be real rough, and I wore it a couple of nights to bed so that I would suffer for Jesus. Well, it only lasted 2 nights. I could not suffer for Jesus, not even that. Couldn't suffer. But this ideology was the same one that was used to placate slaves in our country. Don't worry, Jesus loves you, and when you go to heaven, Jesus is going to take care of you. And the slaves believed it, and that is pitiful. When you think of it, that's pitiful. But they were brainwashed and brainwashed and brainwashed. Okay, so I finished my postulancy, and I'm still determined I'm going to be Jesus' beloved bride. By the way, the other day I saw a T-shirt that reminded me of that. It says, Jesus loves you, but he loves me better. And I thought to myself, that's what I was feeling in those early days. Okay, so comes the day I become a novice. I get the full habit that you see on those pictures, a full brown habit with a cross and a rope and a scapula where I kept my hands underneath so that I wouldn't touch anybody or anything, and a white veil, the same habit where, all I could see was my poor little face and my poor little fingers sometimes, and I was called Sister Mary Concordia at that point. So that year, did we learn about being a nun, about mortification of the senses. Eyes down. You're supposed to walk with your head lowered slightly and your eyes on the ground just enough to see that you don't trip someplace. You're not supposed to look at anything or anyone. You just focus on the Lord. Picture the Lord in front of you. And that's the way it was supposed to be. All right, regarding our ears, no radio. Now, TV, would you believe it? We were allowed to watch Hazel and Ed Sullivan until Elvis got on it, and then we weren't allowed to watch Ed Sullivan. So. But no pop songs. Everything was heresy. Hands under the scapula, fasting. And sometimes it was a real good idea to fast because of the food that they served us. Would you believe bacon in a bowl of fats? It was served on a table, a big bowl, and the bacon was in it with all the fat. And that's how you got bacon. Well, I ate it anyway, but... What? I didn't hear. Bacon! Bacon in a bowl of juice. You're not supposed to ask questions. And as I said, we fasted, and during the meals, no talking allowed. You could not converse with anybody. And I think that was so inhumane, not to be able to talk while you're eating, not be able to chat. Now, there was nothing about our noses, though. We never had custody of the noses. So I guess we were allowed to smell things. I don't know. Sometimes things didn't smell so good, but nobody yelled at us for smelling something. All right, the next big thing during that first year was learning about what we used to call the secrets. And one of the secrets was this silence, and this grand silence from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then from 9 o'clock till Mass the next day. And you were not allowed to say a word except in cases of dire emergency. So that year was a lot of fun. And then we learned about chapter of faults. Now, you're not supposed to ask questions.
I apologize, but there's a lot of people who can't hear, so if you could get as close to that microphone.
I'm sorry.
Back to secrets.
The secrets, chapter of faults. Every Thursday afternoon, you got together, you knelt down, you took the rope from around your waist, you put it around like this, kneeling down in humility and supplication, kissed the floor, and said, Benedicite, Mother Superior. That means, bless me, Mother Superior. These are my faults. And you confess everything you did wrong and every rule you ever broke. And if you forgot something, Mother Mistress would remind you. So it was a great, happy life there, you know. Really made you feel this big, but that's how you were supposed to be. You were supposed to feel this big, and that nothing is going to redeem you, nothing is going to help you unless you love the Lord. And He'll take care of you and bring you to heaven and make the whole damn thing worthwhile. Okay. Then came the real biggie, the discipline. In a nice little ceremony, in the chapter room, we were given a little metal chain. It had a triangle on it with one string this way of the chain and 7 little ones. And guess what that was? A cat o' nine tails. So every Friday night, we sort of, in our little cubicles, nobody could see anybody else, you threw your habit over your head and you beat yourself. And that was because that made God happy. Just think of the implications of these beliefs. You made God happy because you beat your ass. So, anyway, that was the first year. Then the second year, we made our vows, but we stayed in the novitiate, and that same darling Mother Mistress was our boss. And you did start your college then, and we had courses like in epistemology and different branches of philosophy, and 1 or 2 courses about elementary education. And it was during this period that I said, one day I came into Mother Mistress, because we had to see her privately each week, and I said, Mother, you know what? What is this particular friendship? What are they talking about? I had always felt so stupid that everybody else seemed to know what it was and I didn't. And she explained it to me. It meant lesbianism. So I was kind of horrified. I says, oh, Mother, I wouldn't want that. And she turns and looks at me with disdain. Don't worry, no one could ever love you enough. That was one, you know when they say life-defining moments? That was one of my life-defining moments. At that moment, I believed that I was totally unlovable, and it's a good thing I'm in a convent, because otherwise I'd be a spinster. I really believed that. I really felt that. And until good things happened, I believed it. And it colored the rest of my life in the convent. I don't know if she ever knew what she did to me, but I was grateful because that gave me the opportunity to grow smaller and break down into smaller and smaller pieces so that I could be remade. Okay, so I made my vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, especially obedience, and the next time, and I went out to teach. Now, I went out to teach second graders with no degree. All I had was a couple of courses in philosophy and epistemology, but I was expected to know the principles of teaching. Well, I did my best. I liked the kids liked me. They learned. I taught all right, but when I think of it, that was unfair, to charge kids to come to school and to be taught by someone who has no education. But that's the way it was. It probably still is. We would take courses at Seton Hall during the summer, and sometimes we'd have chance for night courses at either Seton Hall or wherever we were stationed. After that second vows, we went out to parishes. So, you know, I was out on parish in Philadelphia and all parts of New Jersey, and I kept on taking courses. And 13 years later, I finally got my BS in elementary education, and that was when I left. They were coincidental, but that's when I had left. All right, I was plagued by doubts. I really was. I mean, I was depressed, miserable, thinking that this is the best way to be. And people would tell me, "Oh, sister, this is called the dark night of the soul. And someday the light is going to come on and you will be so filled with joy that you will never, never, never regret having gone through this." And they said all these temptations are from the devil or they're tests from God. You take your pick what you want. It's either God or the devil, but one of them is doing you dirty. Now comes time for my final vows, and I didn't really want to do it. I didn't really think that this was the way to go. But, you know, logic and reason be damned. I took the leap of faith, and I made my final vows. And then I felt I was totally committed, and I had to stay there. And Vatican II came along, and it looked like, ooh, there might be some light at the end of the tunnel. And Vatican II talked about the nuns getting out of only in the classroom and spending time in the community helping out the poorest of the poor. And the response from the nuns when I said, I want to go out and I want to do this, that, and the other thing, and I got to do it. I did get to do it on Saturdays and Sundays. I came back and the response was, yeah, you go work for those niggers, but you won't help us. I mean, that's verbatim. And I was so horrified that that's one of the things that made me say, it's just not for me. And I realized that the God that these nuns adored was really a miserable construct of a puritanical mindset. I still believed in God, but I decided to make him over. So I made him over to this very, very nice God who was very kind and benevolent and loving and loved people and didn't worry so much about sins that you know, that everything you do is a sin. He wasn't worried about that. My God was a really nice guy. And that went on for a couple of years until I realized I was talking to myself, that there is no God I'm talking to. But I still sort of believed in something, and I wanted to believe. I mean, I was raised that way. I wanted to believe, but there was just something wrong. So finally, in '69, I told them I want to leave. So first step in leaving for them was, she must be nuts. They sent me to a psychiatrist in Washington, D.C. Want to hear the story? Okay, so I went to the psychiatrist. I walked into the office. My sister superior, who was very nice, by the way, took me to his office, and the lady there said, just go upstairs, turn left, and take a seat in that room. The doctor will be with you soon. Up the steps, turn left into room, and what's there but 3 chairs? A hard chair, a medium chair, and a very soft chair. So I said to myself, no matter what chair I take, he's going to want to know why. So I struggled thinking, why? And that's all I can think of. Why did I take the middle chair? I figured, I just figured that would be easiest. So I took the middle chair, and he comes in, and I'm just waiting for him to say, why did you take that chair? Well, he weighed about 450 pounds, and he sat at his desk, put his hands over his belly, and said, "Sister, how often do you masturbate?" And all I could say is, I thought you were going to ask me about the chair. And I don't know what happened after that. I had to go back one more time, but I told him, I'm not coming back. He was more interested in if I masturbated, and at that time I didn't. I'm not going to say I never did, but at that time, since I became a nun, I never did. I wished I could, but I didn't. All right, so that didn't go well. So they gave up on that. So they sent me to Virginia, to the James River, a beautiful home on the James River, for a retreat to think things over with approximately a 32-year-old young, handsome priest who loved music and loved introducing me to Peter, Paul, and Mary and all these other folk singers. So I had a wonderful time. And he says, if you like science, you just go down the riverbank and see what you can find. So I did. I found fossils, lots and lots of fossils. I even found part of the backbone of a whale. And, I had a great time. Came back to New Jersey. I still want to go. So by that time, they said, all right, but first you have to write a letter to the Pope. Well, what am I going to say to the Pope? And I said, you have to tell him that you're a weak, miserable creature, that you're not strong enough to keep your vows, and so you're requesting a dispensation. At that time, I'll do anything. Well, almost anything. So I wrote the stupid letter, and the Friday before Mother's Day of 1969, the dispensation came through. So they called me out of class and gave me my walking papers. I never got to say goodbye to those kids, and that killed me. They were sophomore girls, and I never got to say goodbye, and I hated that. But I had no choice. I didn't know why they were going to call me out, but bingo, there I was. And by Saturday, I was home, and it was the day before Mother's Day, and my mother said, this is the best Mother's Day present anybody could get. And I was welcomed home with warm embraces and hugs and kisses and being spoiled to death. And I loved every minute of it. It was so wonderful to be able to be hugged. It's hard maybe if none of you have gone through that, unless there are some other ex-nuns in here. It was so wonderful. And then I found out that I was naive. I was so naive that I didn't know what I didn't know. Does that make sense to you? I didn't know that there were things I didn't know. I didn't know how to carry a purse. I didn't know how to put on makeup. I still don't. But I do carry a purse, but my friend Murad has to sort of guard it that I don't leave it behind. My husband used to carry it for me. Murad won't do that. Poor Murad. So, but going out of the convent, this big tree out here, that great big oak tree that comes through the floor, my first thing when I saw it was I went up to it and I petted it. I wanted to hug it, because that's what happened when I left the convent. Everything was so beautiful, so wonderful. I didn't have to walk with my head down. I could look at the sky. I could look at people in the face. I could see flowers. I could bend down and touch them. I could smell them. I could do everything. I was free. I could have a puppy. In a convent, I did have a puppy, but I used to keep him underneath. And for 6 weeks, I got away with it, this little tiny puppy called Kiku. But one day, as we walked past Mother Superior's office, I was on my way to school. Just as we walked past her office, she opened the door, and the dog went, "Ruff!" But the girls, some of the girls asked their mothers if they could have the dog, and got a lot of mothers that said yes, so we had a drawing, and Kiku got a good home. And that was right when I was leaving, too, so it worked out very well. Okay, so now I'm out of the convent and smelling things and touching things and enjoying things and wondering about things and being able to say what I want to say, read what I wanted to read. And I ended up at Rutgers University in New Jersey. As I said, it took me 13 years to get my BS. It took me 18 months to get my master's. Accelerated course. But Rutgers opened my eyes. It wasn't Seton Hall. They weren't afraid to talk about anything. And logic and reason, not be damned. Logic and reason was paramount, and I learned logic, and I learned how to be reasonable. And I realized, this imaginary God of mine, forget it. It's me. And so I began my journey towards humanism. I didn't know it. I didn't know what it was called. I figured I was an atheist, or agnostic at the best. That wasn't a good turn of phrase, was it? But anyway, because I don't want to insult anybody, because sometimes people look at agnostics and say they're fence sitters, and that's so unfair. That is so, so unfair. All right. But Mother Superior was right. Mother Mistress, rather, was right. No one would ever love me. And I was so lonesome. New Year's, and everybody went with somebody. I had nobody. And I went to the Knights of Columbus Hall with Mom and Dad. Oh, well. So I figured, well, I went to a therapist, another social worker, and we talked about my situation, and I became convinced that I could be fine on my own, a single woman, have a good life, and not worry about someone falling in love with me. Fine. So I was doing that, and I was fairly happy. It lasted about a couple of months. And then a friend of mine who had been my therapist, that person, had moved to Miami Beach, and she invited me down to visit her. Came down to visit, fell in love with Florida all over again. I had been here when I was 17. And decided I am going to stay here. It's too cold in Jersey. I get stuck in snowstorms. I have to walk home in a knee-deep snow. No more. I'm going to stay in Florida. So she says, look, there's a job at Goodwill, not folding clothes, but training people to work. So I said, oh, all right, I'll go for an interview. So I went for the interview, and I got hired. So I went out, and I rented an apartment, and went back to New Jersey, resigned from my position up there, turned in the keys to my apartment, got in my little Gremlin, and drove down to Florida. And it was the best thing I ever did. I got to Florida on a Thursday afternoon, singing all the way. In my first palm tree, I was whooping. I couldn't help it. I whooped from South Carolina on down. It was just, I'm almost there, I'm almost there. I didn't realize how long and skinny Florida was. But I finally got down to Miami Beach and into my apartment, and the movers came the next day and brought all my furniture up. And then I get a call from the psychologist at Goodwill who had hired me. And he says, is there anything I can do to help you do something moving in? And I said, sure. I said, you can help me hang the drapes. So the next day, he made an appointment. He came over and he says, and by the way, Liz, I've resigned my position. I'm opening a private practice, so there's no conflict of interest. And I said, that's great. And then I said, why don't we just go to the beach first? I'm dying to go to the beach with somebody. So we went to the beach, and lo and behold, we both fell in love. And I mean, instantaneously, it was like a click, and I was head over heels in love, and so was he. It worked. Mother Mistress was wrong. She was wrong. My Jimmy loved me just as much as I loved him. And I told him that story, and he said, never again. I still remember the story, but it doesn't hurt, because it wasn't true. So I don't believe in fairy tales, and I don't believe that damn Mother Mistress either. So, but he was a humanist. That was my first humanist. I never heard the word humanism. He had just gotten back from getting his PhD out in San Francisco, and humanism was a big part of the curriculum. So he says, forget about Goodwill. Let's start our own private practice. So I said, Jimmy, I'm going to stay at Goodwill, but start the practice. I'll work part-time. So we designed a letterhead, and it was the Center for Humanistic Psychotherapy. And we were so proud, but nobody ever came. And we thought it was because of the humanism thing. But you know what it was? Nobody spoke English. It was about the time of the Mariello's boat lift, so I mean, there was a real influx of Spanish-speaking people, and you had to be bilingual to get a good job. And neither of us were. Oh, he was bilingual, but it was Arabic and English. So, I mean, you know, there wasn't too much of a call for Arabic therapists. So, by the way, he was a Christian Arab, Syrian Lebanese, like Danny Thomas. And well, anyway, it was wonderful. We moved a couple of times in Florida. He also introduced me. You're going to be shocked. He introduced me to nudism. So I also became a nudist. So that picture you see of me on there, that's one picture. The other picture was standing like this, the humanist symbol, with just me. I always wanted to put them in juxtaposition to each other, but I never had the nerve. But anyway, it was wonderful. We got married at Goodwill. They threw us a party. I mean, we also had to get married in his church. Then we had to go up to New Jersey and get married in a Catholic church. In a Catholic church. But I had no compunction. I didn't care. As long as we were married, I was just so very happy. We had a good 29 years together. He died in 2005. But he died as he wanted, at home, in my arms. I tried giving him CPR, but it didn't work, and the doctors later said it never would have worked. So, but he left me with so much, you know, not so much money, but so much of everything, of self-esteem, of information, of knowledge, of feeling good about myself, everything. So I wanted to die, of course. I wasn't going to kill myself, but I just wanted to die. I mean, I just sort of existed for a year or so. And then I found FFRF, Freedom from Religion Foundation. I don't know how I found it. I cannot remember. But I called them, and they directed me to the Humanists of the Treasure Coast. And so I joined that, and I found out Treasure Coast Atheists existed too. So I joined that. Now I'm a board member of both. It's no conflict of interest. We have a lot of things we do together. So I really have come a long way. I truly have, and it's been a wonderful journey. I read, I write, I speak, I garden. Life is good, and I have a good friend, Murad. We met about our dogs introduced us about 6 years ago. She had a Jack Russell. She lived in an apartment. I was moving into the next apartment, and I had my dog with me. The dogs looked at each other, barked. We talked, and we became best of friends. And now we bought a house together, and we're living happily ever after with 2 dogs and 2 cats and a garden. So I'm happy. I do some work at hospice, and I told them what I want to do is be there for the non-theistic population. I've only been called once in the last year, but at least that was once. So I'm hoping we can do some more work like that. Now, it's 40-something years since I've been a nun. But, you know, every once in a while, there's little sniggles of nunnism that come out in me. But they're only sniggles. And a lot of times, Murad is the one who says, Nundom. and I realized, when I first came out, I was walking with my hands under whatever I could put my hands under. My mother kept smacking me, and I had my head down, and my mother kept smacking me. So, you know, but lovingly. She smacked me lovingly. So that's some of the things I do. As I said, I've done a number of talks. I write to the newspaper. I've written some articles. Newspapers have interviewed me. They interviewed me about Amendment 8, but when it came out in the paper, former nun, now atheist. That was the title, the headline on page 1. Not in the middle someplace, page number 1, part A. So I was, as they say, outed. So everybody knew. But then I outed myself, really outed myself. I pushed a button for Facebook, figuring I'm going to pick out now who I want to send this to. I didn't know that once you hit Facebook, it goes to everybody you know and everybody that they know. So I got pretty well outed. But it became worse. That article, somebody in Fort Pierce had a sister who was a nun in Lodi, and she sent it to them. So all the nuns in Lodi, who are still, some of them were still friends of mine. Oh, Liz, how could you? What was that word one used? like it's like I'm horrified. It was like where's something like horrified. I'm horrified at what you have done. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback too, but you know, I can't say I don't care, but I'm not going to let it change me. I'm not going to let it influence me. I do want to tell you that I know there's a lot of folks in my group, and I guess up here too, that still are working to disprove the Bible. Well, I've given up on it. It's not worth it. I don't try to disprove Peter Rabbit either. I just, you know, the Bible, it's been done. It's been done over and over and over. It's been proven, blah, 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 by so many people. I don't feel a need to argue that or other religious beliefs. I focus on science. I love science. I love the science shows. And I love their saying, question everything. And I love your saying, too. I was waiting for people to tell me. To question is to answer. That is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful saying. And I think my mind is just, I picture my mind like a castle. And I open one room and I find things, and I go to another room and I find things. And all the while I was living in the gatehouse and didn't even know there were other rooms. And now I can go from room to room in my mind and learn so much. I love, as you know, I love evolution. I love learning about the universe and eternity and existence. And I grow very philosophical in my writings for the Writers Club of the Humanists. And some of them think I'm a little nuts, but that's okay. I think some of them are a little nuts too, but it's so wonderful that we can respect each other and enjoy each other's writing. I'm also a celebrant, and I had my first marriage ceremony performed, and I'm very proud of that, and it did turn out well. I was scared, but it just turned out so well. The one thing I do fuss about is separation of church and state. When there's an opportunity to do something about it, I join in. I try to do something about it. Poems. I love to write poetry, and there's one I do want to read to you. This one poem, if I can, here it is. This was my first poem about humanism. Moran, glasses. Hurry up. I can read the other stuff, but I can't read this little teeny writing. Thank you, ma'am. It's called Free Thoughts. What did you do to these? They won't open up. Okay. Oh, she cleaned them. Wow. Free Thoughts. I am finally free. Free from the insidious, invidious. I am finally free. Free from the insidious, invidious, and hideous bonds of faith that tied me as a child and young woman. I have read through and seen the interminable, involuted, intractable fallacies that encircled my mind and heart and held me captive. Now, as I reach the fullness of my years, these bonds, these fallacies, seem to have fallen off. I stand proud, naked, and beautiful in the bright light of reason, the splendor of honesty, and the freedom of my own thoughts. So that poem sort of summarizes all I said. Yes. Thank you.
Is it time for questions?
A three-liner.
Okay.
A three-liner. As I said, I love to wander around in my mind. My favorite word is suppose. Not who, what, why, when, where, but suppose. So I wrote this little poem. What a wonderful feature for such a small creature to have its own mind as a teacher. And now I'm open to questions. Thank you. Thank you.